Welcome to Curious Conversations, where we explore the power of curiosity in philanthropy and social change. I'm Marianne Fernandez, founder of the Curious Philanthropist, an organization that helps people dream big about the positive impact they can make in the world. With our special guests, we'll be exploring how asking curious questions can lead to deeper impact and meaningful change. In a few moments, you will listen to my conversation with Dr. Richard Marker, a widely respected voice in philanthropy, known for his rare blend of candor, wisdom, and deep ethical insight. Through his work at the Institute for Wise Philanthropy, Richard has helped countless donors and foundations move beyond good intentions toward values-driven, meaningful impact. He's also an educator at heart, having taught at NYU's Academy for Grant-Making and Funder Education, as well as the Center for High Impact Philanthropy at the University of Pennsylvania. What I love about Richard is that he challenges us to think more critically, act more intentionally, and embrace curiosity as a powerful tool for better philanthropy. I can't imagine a better guide for a conversation on curiosity and intentionality. Hi, Richard.
Hello, Marianne. So nice to see you.
I am so excited for our conversation. Our conversation is going to be about curiosity and intentionality. So I thought I would start by asking you how you would define intentionality and especially with regard to philanthropy.
So let's start from a basic assumption, or actually a basic reality of philanthropy. And that is, by definition, philanthropy requires curiosity, or at least asking questions. Whatever curiosity means, it means asking questions. And there's a simple reason for that. And that is, philanthropy is always about the future. And the future, by definition, is unknown. Now, you can go through all sorts of processes to decide how much risk you want to take, but there is nothing that is 100% guaranteed. And so that there's only a relative level of risk or certainty that you do in philanthropy. Because, as I said, the future is unknown. So by definition, anybody who is doing self-aware philanthropy, and I'm going to come to that in a second, self-aware philanthropy is by definition curious. Curious meaning that they're asking questions. Now, I'm going to make a distinction. There's another kind of philanthropy which has great merit, but not the kind of philanthropy that's popular today. And that's noblesse oblige philanthropy. In other words, that for many, many years, people assumed that if you had it, it was your responsibility to give back. You didn't claim expertise. You didn't claim that you knew the best place for it. You knew that you were a member of a community and there were needs out there, and somebody else probably knew better than you about what the needs were. That was philanthropy up until maybe a generation and a half ago. Nothing wrong with that. It certainly has defined things around the world to this very day. But once you start saying, I want there to be some credit, I want my philanthropy to actually have an impact, I want to be able to know what the results are, it forces you to begin to ask questions. The challenge for people, and this is where intentionality comes in, and we're going to spend another couple of sentences on that. The challenge for people is people are afraid that they're going to make mistakes. And so that they therefore sometimes get caught up in looking for certainty, looking for guarantees, looking for the fact that that they're not wasting their money. And they therefore can, as I didn't coin this, but some people call it paralysis by analysis. In other words, it's not my term, but I think it's a good term. And therefore they get caught up in looking for the intention they have is, I want to spend my money well, and I don't want to make a mistake with it because, after all, the money is to do good. Well, the truth is, since there's no guarantee, there's nothing that you can do other than determine what risk you're willing to take. The intentionality comes in to have a good sense about yourself. What are you comfortable with? What are the things that are going to give you gratification if it's successful? So what I mean by success is not necessarily that you've accomplished everything you want to do, but rather that the relationship between what you want to accomplish and what is actually potentially being accomplished is aligned. And so intentionality in these terms is saying, what are my personal risk factors? What are the cultural norms that define me? Do I require recognition, or frankly, would I prefer anonymity? Are these the kinds of things that that I need to be hands-on, or would I be better off if it turns out that I were removed? That has all sorts of implications about how you make philanthropic decisions, but that calls for a self-awareness. So the intentionality in that sense isn't even a matter of values. I know you want to talk about values a bit later, but the intentionality is not so much about values, it's about understanding yourself and what's going to work best for you when you have, as everyone does, a limited amount of money that you want to spend in a way that's consistent with what you hope to accomplish with that.
So, quick comment. As you know, we live in a world where everything is fast. It's like make a decision fast or make an impact quickly. And it sounds like what you're saying is that even taking some time for self-reflection and understanding yourself, understanding your family has great value in this process of intentionality.
So two comments on that. First of all, I'm at the stage of my life where I don't do as much advisory work that I used to do, although I'm still open to doing some in the right circumstances. But almost invariably, if somebody came to me for advisory work and strategy advisory work, one of the first things out of their mouth is, "This is harder than I thought it was going to be." In other words, that they thought that they sold their business, they decided they were going to devote themselves to philanthropy, they inherited money, they were second generation, whatever they were, they said, I'm going to start doing things. And lo and behold, they were ill prepared to what it means to make those kinds of decisions. Didn't matter how successful they were in business, didn't matter how much money they had in the bank, it changed the nature of things. So the first thing that they said is it's harder. However, I want to give the flip side, and that is I always recommend to people that they not get paralyzed, that they take 3 years and do the best they can and not worry about making mistakes. Don't make gifts that are so substantial that people depend on you, but rather and be a little bit responsible about it, but don't worry about making mistakes. And because you're going to learn from that experience about what works for you, what your risk tolerance is, what your comfort level is, what your relationship level is going to be. Then 3 years later, you sit down again, whether you do it with a professional like me or somebody else or by yourselves. 3 years later, you step back and say, now, look, these are all the things that we did. What do we feel good about? What worked for us? What's going to inform our giving forward? By that time, if you've done it in an honest kind of way, in an open kind of way, in a learning kind of way, you're going to be able to sit back and say, I have a very good sense of how my philanthropy is going to work best for me. Who's going to make the decision? What's my relationship with grantees? What's my longevity tolerance? All those kinds of questions will emerge much more naturally if you've really done 3 years of things. Don't wait until it's all resolved. Don't wait until you sit there and have a family meeting and you put your values on the wall and you run around the room and come the basic, the multisyllabic paragraph that defines your mission statement. Don't wait for that kind of stuff. Do the stuff and come back and revisit it and see what works for you.
I think you and I are in agreement with this because there are times when philanthropists, donors, they need to start at a different place. And it's not necessarily starting in a values exercise. Sometimes you're right. You need to go out, you need to try it. And what I heard you say was start modestly because you may make a couple of mistakes. You'll learn from them. You may need to tweak and adjust, but this is all a great process and it takes time.
Modestly means, here's what I mean by modest. Depending on how deep your pockets are, modest can mean different things. So I'm not talking about modest in terms of dollars. What I mean by that is don't do anything that creates a precedent that you can't get out of. In other words, that if it turns out that you're giving to a huge university or a huge museum, the amount of dollars you give can be quite substantial, but they're not going to be make or break dollars for that institution. Those same dollars could be make or break for a local food pantry or for a church or a synagogue or a community center. So it's not a matter of the dollar amount. It's a matter of what's conveyed by that dollar, by what the relationship to it. Don't do anything that creates a precedent that's awkward for you to extract yourself from if it turns out you say that's not really right for me.
I love that point. I love that point. So you've worked with donors across a number of generations, probably some multi-generational families as well. So how does curiosity sort of help bridge those different perspectives on giving across those generations?
So let's talk internally, because that's really where it has to play out. I mean, the questions that you have to ask about where to give ultimately are not really the questions that play out when you're dealing with within a family. And what you really have to do is to get people of different generations to learn how to hear each other. One of the things that often happens is that there is not deep-seated values difference between generations, but rather the manifestations of those values in terms of philanthropy, in terms of the kind of institutions, can vary tremendously. Very often, a founder generation who's older than a certain age views their noblesse oblige commitment to certain institutions. And their first instinct may be that if their grandchildren don't want to support those institutions, they have a different value system. It may turn out they have the same value system, but they don't really see those institutions, those legacy institutions, as the ones that best reflect those values. And so that one of the things that I have to do is to set up a context where people hear each other, so that they're not just hearing what they don't like about each other. One bit of an anecdote of a family story where different generations had to learn to hear each other. And it's a much longer story than I'm going to tell for here, and I'm going to keep it as anonymized as possible. I don't think anybody's going to be able to figure it out from here. But it turned out that at the annual family retreat, they were inviting the third generation in for the first time. And I learned at the very last minute, even though that was not, I was told that nobody told me that was the agenda, that Granddad privately was trying to decide whether or not, he's the one that told me, that whether or not to keep the foundation alive through the grandchildren's generation or spend it all in his lifetime. And therefore, we structured at the last minute, structured the entire program so that he would be able to listen to his grandchildren. Unbeknownst to him, the grandchildren resented Granddad's philanthropy. Why? Because he had a tendency to build hospitals and schools with his name on them. And what really annoyed them was he had literally just announced a wing of a hospital directly across the street from another hospital with his name on it. And the grandchildren said, why do we have to celebrate why do we have to advertise our wealth in this fashion? Well, it turned out when I looked more carefully, I realized that the generation two were three daughters of a generation where they all had changed their name, which meant that none of the grandchildren had the same last name as the founder, as Granddad. What it became clear to me was that those buildings represented his named legacy, because somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew that the day that he died, his name dies. Now, when I explained that to the grandchildren, they didn't agree that that was the best use of philanthropy, but they stopped resenting their grandfather. And in the meantime, by structuring it in such a way that all of the discussion would focus on the grandchildren during the family retreat, it meant that Granddad spent the entire time listening to what his grandchildren had to say about what they thought philanthropy was about. They didn't start out with curiosity about each other. They started out with different presumptions about what this was about. But learning how to hear each other meant that they were able to get beyond it. And the denouement of the story, the happy ending, is that about a month later, the foundation changed its name from the Joe and Mary Smith Foundation to the Smith Family Foundation, and it exists to this very day.
That's a great story. So the moral is to even if there are people in your family you think you know, be curious about them. Ask questions, give them the opportunity to express their thoughts and be open to it.
Yeah, because let's face it, everything is true in families, but more so. In other words, everything in a family, if you disagree, it's a personal issue. If you're in an independent board of directors of an organization or even a foundation, and people have different agreements, you may or may not agree with them, but there's a good chance that you're not going to personalize it. But in a family, everything that somebody says has a personal implication. And so unless you find a way for people to hear what's underneath it, that the disagreement or the opinion is not somehow a personality flaw, but rather a very legitimate different perspective on maybe how to look at the same question, or maybe a different manifestation of what a value looks like when you take it a generation or two later. If you can get to that, if you can find that level, to use your word, curiosity, where you learn to hear each other in different ways, you've really made it possible to jump over the stumbling blocks that so characterize intra-family issues. And I will say, I'll tell you where the hardest challenge is, where people have the hardest time hearing each other. And that's not so much between generations, but within generations. My experience, anything I say is a generalization, of course, but in my experience, the place where there's the greatest uh, inability to hear each other is on the sibling level. It doesn't matter what generation it is, but once you get to the sibling level, the sibling generation level, those are very deep-seated kinds of issues. And when you have years of disagreement, hostility, animosity, misunderstanding, it's awfully difficult to break through those through all of the techniques that you could use when you're talking about intergenerational kinds of issues. That becomes family systems therapy rather than philanthropy stuff. So I would say I don't want to belittle it and say it's automatically easy by getting people to listen to each other, because not every time and not every family and not every situation is easy. But as I said, my experience is that within the same generation, you often have more resistance to hearing each other than intergeneration.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Thank you for that. So, talking about values, now you emphasize the importance of values in philanthropy. A lot of people do. So, how can curiosity help donors really clarify their values and align them with their giving?
So I would, once again, here I want to talk about three categories. Okay, and I'm going to come to the one that you're really asking about in a second. But I want to talk about the other two first because it's important. The first one I'm going to talk about is that values and philanthropy ethics overlap, but they're not identical. Because philanthropy ethics often has to do with how you relate to grantees, how you relate to the philanthropy world in general, how you relate to the civil society, and your persona to the world may manifest, it may be a manifestations of your values, but it's important to understand that whatever your values are, there are ethics that need to inform those things. And the challenge for philanthropists most of the time is that they're the ones who have power. We're the ones, I should say, we're the ones that have the power, because I'm in that position. We're the ones that have the power. And when you're in the power situation, and I'm not talking about current political realities, when you're in the power situation, people don't usually say no to you. And very often, when one of the underlying ethics in the philanthropy situation, regardless of what your personal values are, is you may be unaware. You may not have the self-awareness of how you're coming across, because you're so used to people deferring to you or thinking you're and what everybody talks, funniest, best looking, all that kind of stuff. So category number one is that there's a value in ethical behavior. And so whatever your personal values are, it's important that the manifestation of that with grantees and with the external world has to reflect a certain set of ethical values. So that's number one. Then there's a set of things that I alluded to before that are not values, but they're personal culture. In other words, that you can argue all you want about whether you think anonymity is better than recognition or recognition is better than anonymity. Typically, there's justification for both. There's nothing inherently better or worse than that. There's nothing inherently better or worse than saying you want to be hands-on in your philanthropy versus have distance in your philanthropy. There's nothing better or worse about that. Now, it may be informed by values that you have, but it's important to understand that generically speaking, there's not, from a philanthropy perspective, they are legitimate generic questions that may be informed by their values, but they're not necessarily better or worse. It's a matter of which one works for you. So the second stage is, once you're clear about your ethical persona to the outside world, you kind of have to have a sense of yourself and about what are the things that motivate you. What are your backgrounds? What are the legal issues? What are the religious issues? What are the ethnic issues? What are the cultural issues? Maybe sometimes the national issues or the experiential issues that inform how you think about things. And we don't have enough time for me to give lots of examples of that, but I'm happy to do so. And then there are the values that transcend all of those. And I'm just going to give once again an anecdote which illustrates how these values come into play, and they come through the philanthropy, but they reflect deeper values. And this was sometimes you illustrate things better by an anecdote than just giving abstract terms, if that's okay. This is a family that very successful. They had sold the business. Everybody had trust funds. Everybody was fine. There's a nice foundation. And they were pretty good people and did interesting things. I don't like doing mission statements at the beginning. So at the end, I like to do it at the end. And what they said is, after talking about it, they said they wanted to write a family history reflecting the values that got them there. And they did, and they sat down and they spent some time after they're finished with me writing that value. A year later, that family history. A year later, I was invited back. There were a few open-ended things in a very benign way. And one of the generation two said, that process that we did really made a difference in our behavior. Why is that? He said, well, when you were here a year ago, and we were talking about the philanthropy, we didn't think about how these values manifested themselves in our own life. But in fact, when we sat down to write the family history and the values that got us here, we realized that we all had trust funds. We weren't working. And we realized that that's not the way we wanted to raise our kids. Our kids, we didn't think, the more we thought about it, the more we realized that our kids should not grow up in homes where none of their parents are working. And a year later, 5 of the 6 of them were working. The 6th was a woman who was about to give birth and was pregnant. But the fact is, that's an example of how the process formulates values in a way that can really manifest itself. It came through the philanthropy process, but it manifested itself in their own personal lives and the decisions they made. So what happens is that you have to make it safe, and this goes back to your curiosity. How do you make it safe for people to understand what really are the values that not only motivate them, but that they want to convey on either to the world as a whole or even to their own families? And very often being able to convey that to their own families is as important as having some abstract value system that you put on a wall for the rest of the world to know. So what one needs to do about the values is to really understand what does it mean to live a life of value, and then how does that and that may not become clear until you've gone through another process. Hopefully, in the ideal world, you manifest that through the ethics of your behavior with others. You manifest itself through the way in which the family relates to each other, and you manifest itself in the way in which you make philanthropic decisions. So that, I think, is a long answer to your question about values. I hope it was helpful.
No, I think it's great. And I think the point that you were making too is that philanthropy is a journey, just like life is. You learn things about yourself in life, you make adjustments, and this is the same in philanthropy. So thank you for that answer. So I've got one last question for you. So what is a key question that donors should ask either before setting up a major gift, a foundation, or even committing to a strategy for their philanthropy? What's a key question that donors should ask themselves?
I always ask people, when I teach, I have a session on exit strategies. Um, And one of the things I say to them is that good philanthropic decision making should include from the very beginning what the exit strategy is going to be. Because the exit strategy is going to help you understand number one, what's going to make you feel it's successful, what's your risk tolerance, what's your longevity perspective, what kind of relationship that you want to have. If most of the discussion that people have is going into the process, have I done enough due diligence, do I have enough information, do I have confidence that it's going to cost me the right amount of money, and then the assumption is it's all going to take care of itself. But if at some point in the process you say, okay, if we make this gift, what are the kinds of things at the end of the day that are going to make me feel that this was the right kind of gift for us? And so that by building in an exercise about the exit strategy, and there's lots of legitimate exit strategies. I mean, it's not just once again we don't have a lot of time to give a lecture, but there's lots of legitimate exit strategies. But if one goes through the process of saying, at the end of the day, when I've made this gift, and I look at it 5 years from now, or look at it 3 years from now, or look at it 10 years from now, what's going to make me glad that I made this gift? And that's not a matter of whether the gift necessarily brought about the greatest change in the world. Sometimes the most important gifts that you make, you're not going to be able to measure for 10 years or 15 years. And as long as you're willing to live with that, then that may be a wonderful example, right? We came up with with vaccines for COVID because there had been primary research that had been going on for a long time before then. Now, there was later research that was more immediate, but there had been primary research that required a buy-in to a long-term process. That's legitimate philanthropy. So the question is not so much that; it's a matter of if at the end of the day, what's going to make you feel as if this was the right kind of gift for you. And if you've done that, then you've asked the question that will then automatically lead to all the other kinds of questions.
This is why I love talking to you, because you always distill, your comments into things that are insightful, but also practical. So I think it's just the perfect way to end a conversation with you. So thank you so much for joining me, Richard.
Marianne, it's my pleasure, and it's been great to know you for a long time, and all of the viewers will enjoy all of your podcasts, I'm quite sure.
Thank you so much. What an insightful conversation with Richard Marker. Here are a few themes that stood out to me. 1, start with self-awareness. Curiosity in philanthropy isn't just outward phasing, it begins with understanding ourselves. What kind of giver are you? Are you comfortable with risk? Do you prefer public recognition or quiet impact? Hands-on involvement or a more strategic distance? And most importantly, what outcome would truly gratify you if a grant is successful? Answer these questions may not come quickly or at the beginning of your philanthropic journey, and they may evolve as your experience increases. So give yourself some time. This self-reflection can help ground your philanthropy in intention, not impulse. 2, in family or collective giving, lead with listening. Whether you're giving as a family or part of a group, curiosity about each other is really crucial. So don't assume, ask questions. What motivates your family or co-donors? What values are guiding their choices? And in families especially, dynamics can get personal. But philanthropy can actually be a tool to clarify shared values if we take the time to listen before deciding. And third, think about the end from the start. What's your exit strategy? Now, this isn't about walking away. It's about defining success before you commit funds. What will make you feel that your gift was the right gift? Envisioning that outcome from the beginning adds clarity and accountability, both for you and the organizations you support. Dr. Marker reminds us that wise giving isn't just generous, it's deeply thoughtful. And when curiosity and intentionality work hand in hand, philanthropy becomes not just effective, but personally meaningful.